Chapter 16, Slavery in America. Introduction. This lecture is the story of how and why slavery grew in the antebellum period in America, roughly from the late 1700s until the 1850s. It's a story much in need of telling, because students naturally ask how slavery could have gotten started here in the first place, in a country founded by liberty-loving immigrants, and how it could have been allowed to grow when it did get started, in a country whose Declaration of Independence and entire cultural foundation was supposed to be devoted to the freedom of every citizen to pursue life, liberty, and happiness. You will learn the answers to these questions in this lecture, and they are not ambiguous answers. One of the first things you will learn is that nobody really wanted slavery here in the first place. The first slaves were brought here by accident. A Dutch ship stopped by a port city in Virginia in 1619 for repairs, and the ship's captain didn't have enough money to pay the workmen, so he swapped the work for a few Africans he had on board. The Africans were employed in Virginia not as slaves, but as indentured servants, expected to work for a term of years, usually 7, to earn their freedom, which is what these Africans did. Using indentured servants for manual labor became popular in the South after that, but the idea did not last, and you will learn why. You will also learn why growing short staple cotton, the most lucrative and most easily grown money crop in the South, suddenly became fabulously profitable after 1800, and why Southerners could no longer use indentured servants to plant and harvest it. Yet the Founding Fathers, many of whom were Southern planters themselves, when they debated the contents of the country's new Constitution at Philadelphia in 1787, were dead set against using slave labor to plant and harvest short staple cotton, or anything else for that matter. And to emphasize that point, they actually put an expiration date on the slave trade, 1820, by which time they hoped, they expected, that slavery in America would be found only in the history books. So what went wrong with their plan? You will find out. Of course, we know that the plan was not fulfilled, so the rest of this lecture is about dealing with the cancer of slavery, which did in fact take the place of indentured servants in the South for all the years leading up to the Civil War, with the result that the Southerners went in one direction and the rest of the country went in another, historically speaking, the two growing inexorably and fatally apart. And that's a story you should know, because telling it reveals its own form of the American spirit, as the anti-slavery crusaders did not give up on their goal, even as the institution of slavery itself metastasized too deeply to be excised by any measures short of war. You will learn why the Southerners chose not to listen to the drumbeat of history, even as their slaves rose up in bloody rebellion, sometimes slaying every white person they could find, knowing they would themselves be gruesomely executed in the end, yet preferring death to the alternative of living another day in bondage. You will also learn why the slaves chose to stay and fight for their freedom in this country rather than be moved to a country of their own, land which abolitionists actually bought for them on the coast of Africa. You will learn why fighting for the slaves' freedom became important to so many white people who actually had nothing to lose by not getting involved. And you will learn, at the same time, why the most ardent and uncompromising advocate of abolitionism was himself almost lynched by a white mob in the North, not the South, because his views were considered not just radical, but treasonous. Yes, the slavery issue was controversial in the extreme, and not just in the South. You will learn all the reasons why this was so. You will learn what the slaves themselves had to say about slavery, and what they intended to do about it. And speaking of acting on convictions, what, do you suppose, did Americans of deep religious convictions have to say about slavery? People moved by the devout urgings of the Second Great Awakening, which you've just studied in the previous lecture. Their response was not as predictable as you might think. And how about the politicians? Could the same political party represent the interests of both anti-slavery constituents in the North and pro-slavery constituents in the South? Was compromise even possible? The entire American political system was built on compromise. Why not compromise on the slavery issue as well? You will learn the arguments on both sides, and you will learn much more about this also in the next lecture. You will also learn why many influential Northern business people thought the slavery issue was not actually that important, certainly not important enough to go to war over with the Southerners, and why some Northern merchants and bankers actually needed the Southern economy to remain slave-based. While the idealistic abolitionists declared the injustice of it all from the housetops, these more realistic, economic-oriented bankers, merchants, and industrialists saw a huge national price tag attached to the liberation of millions of illiterate slave workers in the South, none of them prepared for either the responsibilities of citizenship or for doing any work other than that which they and their ancestors had been doing for hundreds of years already. So what to do? What to do? The question is posed for you in this lecture so that you know how hard it was to try and answer it.